Hi, and welcome back to How Humans Heal. I'm Dr. Donnie Wilson, and today I'm going to introduce you to my friend, Dr. Catherine Clinton. She's a naturopathic doctor, and she's been practicing for over 15 years and has also healed herself from health issues, including autoimmunity. Really, Catherine is an expert in what is being called quantum healing and quantum biology. And so I really am excited to talk to her today so that all of you can become familiar with these concepts. And actually, even though it sounds like something complicated and involving physics, it actually comes back to some of the most basic, simple things we can do to help ourselves heal. Thank you so much for joining me today, Catherine.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Donnie. I just love you, and I'm so glad that we get a chance to talk, and thank you for having me on today.
Absolutely. Yes. We love getting to connect with each other on social media and in person and where any which way we can figure it out because we share so many of the same views and perspectives on just our existence here as humans and wanting to help others heal. And I'm always so inspired by what you do, including your summit. You hold a summit and many other workshops relate, to inspire people and help people to understand how coming back to connection with nature can help us heal, including what's sometimes called tending to your terrain. Tell us more let's start with that. What does that mean to tend to your terrain?
Absolutely. I think it was maybe April of 2020. I read a story about this beautiful beach in Spain that was being sprayed with bleach to stop the spread of germs. And it was, of course, the start of the pandemic, and it was a time when everyone was very concerned. But that was just such a horrendous misunderstanding of the natural terrain in the world around us. And so I started this hashtag on social media, Tend Your Terrain, to really get people to understand that we don't end at the barriers of our skin. We're intimately, inseparably tied to the world around us. And so when we spray bleach on the environment around us, that has an intimate impact on our own microbiome and our own health. And there are much more productive ways to improve our health than something so drastic as that. And so tending to our terrain can mean so many things. It can mean gardening, right? It can mean tending to the relationships in our life. It can mean tending to that self-talk within us, right? A lot of us have that negative self-talk that's sort of on autopilot. Tending to that is a beautiful way to cultivate that relationship within us, cultivate that positive thought and health, and tend to our terrain that way. Tending to our terrain can look like picking up litter at the beach when you see it. I mean, there's so many things. Cooking a good meal, being conscious of where our food comes from, being conscious of our daily input of light, of sound, of smell, so many things. Our terrain, really, the point of talking about this so much that I do is to get people to understand that our terrain is everything. Our terrain is within us, it's external to us, and little steps we can take to tend to it have huge impacts on our health.
It's amazing because, I mean, it can cover so many different health issues. So anyone listening and you're like, how is this going to relate to what's going on with my health? I mean, it can help in anything from mental health issues, right? Anxiety, depression, migraines, anything in that area, but also digestion, hormone imbalance, uh, immune system infections, right? Autoimmunity. What are some of the common, any other health conditions that come to mind for you where you're like, oh, this absolutely would be helped by tending to your terrain?
Yeah, you named a few of them, right? Autoimmunity, mental health, GI conditions are a huge one that are really the reflection of our terrain, internal and external. And so, I mean, I can't really think of a condition out there that isn't impacted by our terrain because we are embedded in that terrain, and our internal terrain is ever present and always influencing our immune status and our health status. So I think we'd be hard pressed to find something that wasn't impacted by our terrain.
That's a really good point. It's like that's how important it is to bring our awareness to. I think when I listen to you, I'm like thinking, how do we bring awareness to what's happening inside of us, right? Like sometimes we're so busy, right? We're busy in our day, rushing, and we have all of these different stresses and demands and worries, right? We're worrying, how am I going to pay this bill? Or how am I going to, make it to the bus to pick up my child? Or how am I going to, like all the different things, all the things on our to-do list that we aren't really paying attention to what's going on in my body, what does my body need, let alone, like you're saying, our connection to the world around us. Is it light outside? Is it dark? What is it cold? Is it hot? Like, right? Like, am I getting to spend time in nature? And it's that distraction from our own selves and distraction all about the stress that's going on that ends up causing us to be separate from our terrain. Would you say? Is that tell us how you would explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're sort of not only in the epidemic of chronic disease, but we're in an epidemic of disconnection, and they really go hand in hand, right? I talk a lot about quantum biology and this deeper level of understanding of how our biology works. And it really comes down to this interconnection, that we are so interconnected to the world around us, to within ourselves, and how it differs from the biology we learned in school, right? We learned like, here's the brain, and that is what is in charge, and there's the heart, and it pumps the blood, and here are the lungs. It's like, actually, they are part of a circuit. They are intimately interconnected. We can't really separate out one. Of course, one has more to do with respiration, and one has more to do with neurological function, and one has more to do with pumping the blood, but they all have a interconnection with each other. They're all constantly speaking to each other, communicating with each other, and regulating other things in the body. That's something that we totally didn't learn about when we talked about the heart in school and learned about the heart in naturopathic medical school. It was the heart, and it was cardiovascular health, and, which is a real thing. Of course, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that there is this layer of interconnection that we often don't appreciate. And when we get down to that level of health, we can kind of get to a new level of root cause for our symptoms and our disease.
This like interconnection of the different systems in the body. That's part of it, right? That these different systems are talking to each other. The gut is talking to the brain, and the brain to the gut, and they're in a conversation. Same with the hormones, all the systems interconnecting. But I also find it so interesting to also think of, like, let's say, in Chinese medicine and acupuncture, all the interconnection that we've known, in these ancient medicines, let alone, let's say, Ayurvedic medicine, similar idea, and the chakras, right? These energy centers in the body, and how, it is, in addition to, as you're saying, in addition to the anatomical heart, we have the heart chakra, right? And so they always show us interconnections. And so I'm so curious how in ancient medicine, they understood all of that interconnectivity, right? And we're now having to remind ourselves about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the things I love about quantum biology, is it just brings us full circle back to what those ancient indigenous cultures always talked about, right? This flow of energy, this interconnection. They had ways of diagnosing it, treating it, assessing it. I mean, they still do, right? These practices are still being practiced today. And now modern science that looks through a microscope, right? That Western science is really validating some of these ideas. I mean, when we talk about the fascial network and how it seems to be mirroring those meridian patterns, those chakra patterns, it's really absolutely fascinating and so exciting, because of course they held knowledge. Of course these cultures held knowledge because they had what we don't have time for, right? Right now, everything we have in science needs to be proven at the end of a microscope, and those replicated studies and peer-reviewed journals, which is wonderful. We need that evidence. But what those ancient cultures had was time to observe, right? Those sages that went out for 10 years and separated themselves from society so they could be in relationship with a waterfall or with the sun, right? That's what we don't have time for in modern life. And that wisdom is still holding true and being validated now. So it's just a beautiful full circle return that I'm so excited to be around for.
Yes, it is. And I want to talk about the science that we're discovering. But first, just to point out this term quantum healing, quantum biology. And I love how you're explaining it so people get a sense and a comfort level of like, what do we mean by that? It's yes, this awareness of the interconnectivity, awareness of energy. Like sometimes I look at it as sometimes the things that we can't see. Like you said, with a microscope, we're used to being able to see things, but there's all of this going on around us that we can't really see with our eyes, but we know it's there. But I would love to, if someone says to you, what does that mean, quantum? What does that mean, quantum biology?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question because so many of us have heard about biology. So many of us have heard about quantum physics, but not many of us have heard about quantum biology. And really what it is, it's an emerging field in science that is looking at quantum phenomenon. So quantum tunneling, quantum entanglement, quantum coherence in living systems. Now, these quantum phenomenon used to be studied in a quantum physics lab, and they would cool everything down below absolute zero. So no life could exist. They would shield the experiment from any noise, any vibration, any heat that would disturb this delicate balance. But what researchers are finding today is that it is that chaos of a living system. It is that noise alive in our body that is creating the perfect backdrop for these quantum phenomenon. And so really quantum biology is just the study of the smallest pieces of our biology at work that give rise to what we see with our symptoms and our disease and our lab work, right? It is the study of electrons, protons, photons of light, phonons of sound, frequency of thought, and how that impacts our biology. And, when you think about the model that we've been working under for the last couple hundred years, this idea of Newtonian physics really can't explain everything in our body. If you think about the trillions and trillions of cells we have in the body, and you realize that each cell is performing hundreds of thousands of tasks each second. Some researchers and scientists even estimate it in the millions, right? So you have this enormous number of tasks happening in these cells every single second. And that is impossible under the current Newtonian physics model. And that model is this chemical mechanical model that talks about random collision, right? So we've got the receptor enzyme key and the lock, and they randomly bump into each other like, strangers in a dark room trying to find each other. And there's just no way that we can complete that amount of activity, those many tasks per second underneath that model. And it's not to say that that doesn't exist. Of course, we know that exists. What quantum biology studies is the smallest pieces that seem to give rise to that reaction. And it's not random. It's seeming like it's quite a beautiful dance of intelligence, which is also something that's fundamentally reassuring and beautiful to study.
Absolutely. To realize like, wow, there's this, it's not just us alone in our existence, that there's energy and there's intention and purpose. And it's when something happens, it's happening because there was this orchestration of of events that cause it to occur. Even if it's something that we would consider negative, we can then look at that and go, okay, let's look at all the factors that came into play for that to occur. And then how can we, and it also, to me, a lot of times it's pointing out that it's not, usually if we're helping someone with healing, it's not going to just be one thing that creates a change either, right? It's not like we're going to just take one vitamin or make one single change and then the whole system changes. I mean, occasionally there might be that big of an impact, but it's more likely that we're creating a shift, like we're changing multiple variables that then allows the whole terrain or environment and energy and everything shifts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's this beautiful dance of interconnection, right? Back to what we were talking about before. It's not this random mutations, random collision. There's really this sort of unseen order that seems to be guiding life. And that's a beautiful thing. And I'm so glad that researchers are studying it.
Yes, let's look at that because I always think like nature is such a beautiful example. It teaches us, right? And some of the most amazing research comes back to one of the things I think we take most for granted, which is water. We have water, we drink water, we're a high percentage of our bodies are made of water. We're right now it's raining outside. There's water all around, right? And yet we kind of like, you know what I mean? Take it for granted and in terms of its power. And there's researchers that I know you have interviewed and worked with. And I'd love to hear, what you learned from them in terms of just understanding something as simple as water and how that can teach us about this quantum biology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel so indebted to Gerald Pollock, Dr. Pollock, and his research out of the University of Washington. He was the first researcher to identify what many people, he termed EZ water for exclusion zone water. Many people are calling it structured water, hexagonal water, biological water. It goes by many different names, but basically what it is that inside of us, we have water that lines our organs, our cells, our tissues, our vessels. And this water takes a different shape or structure than what we might consider bulk, ordinary water. And it really looks like a honeycomb underneath, when we are looking at the structure. And it's because of the bonding of those hydrogens, we're used to H2O as water, right? And when we look at it from a molecular standpoint, it's kind of like a Mickey Mouse head. I have two kids.
That's where to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where my mind goes. It's like the big Mickey Mouse face with the little, hydrogen ears. And what is happening with the fourth phase of water or structured water is that it's looking like it's H3O2. And those hydrogens become more tightly bound in a hexagonal, like a honeycomb. And as one sheet of this structured water forms on our tissues, our cells, our vessels, our hydrophilic, our water-loving surfaces, it acts as a template for more sheets to form. And what Pollock and his team found was that this structured water not only has a different structure, but it's also mostly negatively charged. And when it forms, like if you're very math-minded, you might be saying H3O2, where'd that other hydrogen go? Well, it is kicked out to form a proton-rich zone, or a proton in the research, sometimes they call it a proton wire. And so you've got this negatively charged structured water that's adhered to the surface of, let's say, a cell or a vessel, and it's negatively charged. And then immediately outside of that, you have this proton-rich zone or a proton wire. And what Pollock did was he put an electrode in each one and found that that separation of charge, just like the separation of charge in a 9-volt battery, was enough to create action. It was enough to actually light an LED light bulb. So it's certainly enough to contribute to biological action. And this is not something that's new. I mean, we have Nobel laureates like Albert St. Georgi and Gilbert Ling and Emilio de Ogiche, who really talked about the idea of that energy being used for biological action and being the initiator of what we see as these key and lock reactions in the body, these enzymatic reactions in the body being initiated by this exchange of energy between the waters in our body. And it's just absolutely fascinating.
It really is. It really is. It's like to understand that it's not just like the way I kind of think of it is like, we think of water just like what we're drinking in a cup of liquid water. And then we think of ice, right? Like a frozen water. And what you're describing as this easy, or however we want to call it, water is somewhere between liquid and ice. And that's why it's creating a structure. It's like in between turning into a hard structure like ice. It's more of this mobile structure that's negatively charged that allows allows life to happen, right? That's what allows. And if our cells lack this easy water and lack the negative ion, they become unhealthy cells, right?
Absolutely. There's been research to show that with immune disorders with cancer, right? When you look at a cancerous cell under a microscope, you'll see that it has a very diminished structured water zone outside of it. And inside of the cell, rather than having the structured water that we would see in a healthy cell, we see that bulk water present there. And that's been done with breast cancer research. And so it's really fascinating to think that plays such a huge role in our health. And, there's so many different names that are being termed for this water, but I think one of the most beautiful ones to help explain it is a crystalline water, because it really does sort of act like this liquid crystal, right? And as soon as I say liquid crystal, it's like, oh, gem shops and, all this kind of stuff. But really, it's something that we're really quite familiar with. You and I are speaking here and able to see each other because of this liquid crystal technology in our screens, in our computer screens and TV screens and smartphone screens, this ordered, structured molecular structure where the molecules are aligned in the same way. And when an impulse of energy or light is introduced, then they correlate together as a collective to a different orientation. That's what we are seeing in this structured water. It's very reactive to energy, specifically infrared energy, which is abundant in the body, and it's abundant on this earth, right? Our sun is.
If we want to say, how do we increase our crystalline water in our cells, this healthy version, the healthiest cell structure, really, then, let's go through the list. I mean, but it's one of the best ways is exposure to infrared energy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And infrared energy is all around us and it's inside of us. And movement is a wonderful way to increase our infrared energy, right? Our mitochondria, those little sort of jelly bean shaped organelles inside of our cells, they create infrared energy every time we're creating ATP. And that serves to structure the water inside the cell. We were just talking about a cancerous cell, and those mitochondria aren't doing the same thing in a cancerous cell that they're doing in a healthy cell. And one of those things is creating infrared energy and structured water at the same time. So we can look at movement as a great way to structure our water. And it doesn't have to be these HIIT, high intensity interval training and Olympic weightlifting or something really intense. Just a walk can create infrared energy, right? We need to really remember that this stuff isn't unattainable. It's very easy to access gentle movement. It's easy to access exposure to the sun. And that is the greatest source of infrared energy on our planet. And of course, we want to do that safely because sun damage is a real thing. And it actually degrades that fascial network in our skin that helps us collect that infrared energy, right?
So it's like how to find just the right amount, right? How to get just the amount that's good and not overdo it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are apps out there, D-Dimer, Circadian Life. There are apps out there that will tell you, okay, you plug in your skin type, which I am quite fair. And so I put that in, I put in where I'm at, and it accesses the local weather patterns and tells me, like, you have 10 minutes out in the sun before you start to damage. Or on a day like today, you will never be damaged because the sun is so covered in clouds here in the Pacific Northwest. But on times like this, where I don't get access to that infrared energy, and of course I get access to the full spectrum of natural light from the sun during the winter, absolutely. But that heat, that infrared energy, I will get during the winter from saunas, from a hot bath or a warm bath. Those are easy ways to increase our infrared energy. Even a warm beverage, drinking tea. John Stewart Reed has done wonderful research on how just increasing our infrared energy by consuming warm water is a great way to do that. So these things don't have to be expensive. They don't have to be unattainable. They can look like regular, normal life. And if we have the understanding of what's happening with a warm bath or what's happening with a warm cup of tea, then it makes the understanding, the motivation much more different, right? And there's lots of things that we can talk about. Grounding is another one that researchers like James Oshman think really help that infrared capacity, help build that structured water. So,
I was just going to ask you about that, like, because it's even, as much as you can. I mean, I guess right now we're heading into the winter, whether it's snow or rain, but setting that aside, spending time in nature, and finding ways to do that can be such a great, we know it's helpful for our health, but now that we're getting this information about quantum biology, it's making sense, right? We go, oh, no wonder spending time in nature, forest bathing or walking on the beach or all the different ways that we even might just get a few minutes in nature, whether we're in the sun or not, it's so healing for us. I'm really excited to open enrollment in my new 14-day detox program. It's based on my experience spending 16 days in the Amazon, and I realized I really want to be able to support all of you to safely and effectively detox from home. The 14-day detox includes a kit with protein powder, including antioxidants to support liver detoxification, as well as an anti-inflammatory diet plan, daily videos and tips from me, as well as my self-care notebook, and lots of encouragement to spend time in nature to reset your circadian rhythm. I want you to be able to detox your mind, body, and spirit so you can get back to balance and move forward in your life with resilience. I can't wait for you to join me in this transformational process. So tell us about grounding or earthing and how that works.
Well, I love talking about grounding. And before we go there, I just want to do a plug for outdoor exposure, even in wintertime. So I know you're familiar with the Pacific Northwest and how a lot of us call it the gray season. We know the sun is up, but we can't see it. It's behind a thick layer of clouds. It is cold outside. It is not that type of season where we want to go out and put our feet on the grass and kind of bask in that warm summer sun. But the exposure we get from wintertime, that exposure to cold, actually will increase our mitochondria in the cell, thus increasing that infrared energy. So in a kind of flip of what we would think, right? Normally we think, oh, we need to be warm. All these things she's talking about, saunas and sun and warm teas and baths. But being seasonal, really living in connection with the land so that we are out being exposed to cold. And of course, I don't mean frostbite and freezing. I mean something reasonable where we actually feel a chill on our face or the breeze through our clothing so that we're able to experience that change in temperature of winter. That will increase our infrared energy and our mitochondria in the cell. And it doesn't have to be extreme, naked in the snow type of thing. It's just letting our bodies know that it's winter, because so many of us live in this 70-degree climate, whether it's 95 outside or it's 50 degrees or 40 degrees outside. We live inside and it's always 70 degrees, and our bodies weren't meant for that. They're meant to live in relationship with the earth. And that brings us to grounding and earthing, and how we as humans have a negative charge. We're electrically charged, and that charge is negative. And Dr. Wallace has done great research on mitochondrial function. And when the voltage of our mitochondria or our cell is decreased, then symptoms and disease arise. So this isn't woo or strange. This is decades and decades and decades of research showing that our cell membrane electrical potential, the voltage of our mitochondria are really foundational to our health. And what happens when we go outside, I like to say with my patients that the earth is the socket and we're the plug. We really just need to plug in and get recharged, because what's happening, just in this few seconds of talking about grounding, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lightning strikes around the globe, our earth, replenishing that negative charge, that net negative charge of the earth, and replenish our own negative charge, which we've already established is important for health. And so that's what grounding really is. And there's many ways to do that. We can put our bare body, hands, feet, whatever it might be, in contact with the grass, the dirt, the soil, the sand, rocks embedded in the earth. There are grounding shoes out there so that you don't have to be barefoot and you can still be absorbing that electrical charge from the earth. There are grounding mats and sheets, even clothes. A lot of our modern clothes like spandex and I'm blanking on the other names of them.
Synthetic fabrics, yeah.
Yeah, those synthetic fabrics block that conduction of electrons. So fabrics like cotton or linen, silk, they're very conductive and they allow you to still gather those electrons. So sitting on a cotton blanket and wearing cotton pants, it doesn't have to look like this bare body touching the earth, right? It can look like that. Even petting our pets that are standing barefoot on the ground while we're in our modern non-conductive outfit, just our hand petting a dog that's standing in that electrical current will help ground as well. And so it's just a beautiful way to help maintain this electrical charge that gets diminished in our modern day life.
And it doesn't have to be a long period of time either. Like it could be a few minutes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially when we're talking about inflammation and the nervous system, like just a few minutes, we see a decrease in inflammation. We see a balancing of that nervous system. And I know most of us are really familiar with that fight or flight mode that we're in, like, okay, the alarm clock, and we got to go, and this and the deadline and da-da-da-da-da, and the bills and the kids and the dinner and the, oh gosh, tomorrow. It's just like this cycle.
A day off, but it never comes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so grounding is a wonderful way to bring us back into that parasympathetic mode in the nervous system without having to take a day off, without having to solve the problems that are coming in. It just is that beautiful relationship we have with the earth that does that.
Amazing. And something we can integrate into our daily routine in a way where it doesn't necessarily have to take, because people worry, how am I ever going to find time for this? But it can be integrated in where it's just part of your usual activity. And I think this is the thing, is that as you're describing, we're so much in this stress survival mode, and yet we're also looking for how can we escape from it, right? So we go to, try to numb ourselves or check ourselves out somehow. So we tend to reach for other substances, whether it's alcohol or, even certain activities, watching TV, episode after episode, or playing games, video games, or, whatever, like we can reflect on, like, okay, how is it that we're trying to escape the everyday stress by distracting us or numbing our brain or trying to find solutions? But so many of the things we reach for end up having other side effects or dependency or withdrawal symptoms. And so we find ourselves in this, we talk about it as like, addiction patterns, and so I feel like so many humans are lost in that, right? Like trying to keep up, but ending up finding themselves addicted to something to try to solve the situation with stress. And sometimes if it, just knowing what you've been sharing with us today, to be able to say, hey, what if we can build in our own sort of like escape from that stressful reality, build in these opportunities to be in nature and connect with the world around us and connect with ourselves. Now we have our built-in time to recover in our day, and we find ourselves less and less, it's at the end of our limit, right? Of how am I going to continue like this? We end up creating that space and experience so we don't find ourselves at that limit. I don't know. I'm curious, what your take is on that and how you talk about that.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with what you just said, that searching for safety in a substance, in a scroll, in binging of a show, whatever it may be. So many of us aren't living in safe relationships, safe workplaces, safe societies. I mean, right now, I think a lot of us are feeling the lack of safety in the world at large on a global perspective. And so to be able to find safety in a patch of grass, in the touch of a tree, those things really help solidify that center, that grounding center that we all have, that when we come back to that, when we regulate our nervous system, when we cultivate those relationships with ourselves and with the world around us, then we don't need to gravitate towards those things, because that center becomes stronger. It becomes more resilient. And I couldn't think of a better time to start really placing importance on that and to start cultivating that in our own lives. And it doesn't take gobs of time and a lot of investment. It can look like making sure that you get outside for a few minutes in the morning, making sure that you take a 10 or 15-minute break in your day to be outside and to sort of end the day, kind of lower the lights when the sun goes down. I mean, these things can have an enormous impact on our health. And they're very accessible and free for us to access at any time. And I think that, when I first got introduced to this idea of quantum biology, and started talking about it with my patients, it was like a to-do list, right? Like, go outside and ground, go outside and get electrons, go outside and get infrared, and you do this thing. But the more you do it, you start to actually form a relationship. Like, I am happy when I see that sun return in the morning. I'm so grateful to be hugging the earth when I am able to ground. It's a relationship and a safety and a sense of belonging that I don't find necessarily in other parts of my life. So that's something that I never anticipated when I started doing this years ago and talking about it. I never anticipated it, that I am actually cultivating these relationships that are undying. They will be with me until the end. That relationship with our inner voice, that relationship with the world around us, with the water, with the sun. These things can bring such a sense of safety and peace and belonging, and they're not going to leave us. They're just with us.
Oh, that's beautiful. So much of, yeah, just realizing here we are humans on Earth. And, like sometimes we, with all the other things going on around us, we lose track of that. And the fact that humans do, we require, access to the sun. And not only that, but the circadian rhythm you were alluding to, the light and the darkness. And if we're constantly in same light exposure, our nervous system, it doesn't even know what's day and night. And so, of course, we're not going to feel good. So it needs, starting to see that if the symptoms that we're experiencing are actually trying to tell us that our human body is lacking these, I call it stress recovery, but it's also this connection with the world around us and the earth that we live on. And even if we bring it back to some of these indigenous cultures, the elements, right? The elements were water, fire, air, earth. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It just brings us full circle back to what we sort of always intuitively have known as humans. And when I look into it in the research, I love to study these cultures, right? And it's ubiquitous, whether we're talking about ancient European indigenous cultures, or we're talking about ancient indigenous African cultures, or we're talking about the indigenous ancient cultures of the Americas or of Asia or Australia or the islands. I mean, it is really ubiquitous. And they all had an acknowledgement that our health is really a reflection of where we're standing in relationship with the world, with the universe, with this flow of energy. And I think that modern science is starting to acknowledge this and validate this. And so it's a really amazing time for me. I'm so excited and I just love researching this stuff. I love sharing about it because it's so exciting to see those concepts validated and acknowledged when they have been ignored and dismissed for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I couldn't be more excited about it.
Well, and anyone listening who you'd like to hear more from Dr. Catherine, she posts regularly on social media. We'll put links to her Instagram and also on Facebook and probably others as well. I always look forward to your posts because they give me a little bit of this dose of Catherine's beautiful connection with the terrain and reminding us how simple it can be to access these tools and activities that can help us heal. What other ways, Catherine, can people find more, learn more with you? We'll certainly put a link to your website, but tell us what else can they do to learn more about all of this?
Sure. I'm Dr. Catherine Clinton, and I'm that way on social media. My website is drcatherineclinton.com. And like you said, I'm constantly sharing this information. I love our relationship on social media because I love seeing your posts as well. And so I'm doing that constantly. I have a free summit that happens every fall. I have courses and free downloads and guides, structured water guide and fascia and rewilding, really getting in connection with the terrain around us. So my website has free downloads. It has courses you can take, free blogs. I just really, truly believe that this is the future of medicine. So I tried to give so many different ways for us to access that.
Oh, that's beautiful. And thank you for everything. I know how it is when you feel passionate about something, it just keeps flowing out of you and you just can't find enough ways to share it. And then, I think that's beautiful. And I'm sure that the listeners too see that and they're like, okay, yes, this is a fountain of knowledge that, listen to that. And instead of, listening to something that ends up creating more stress, listen to, here's the ways that we can help ourselves heal. Because actually, I really see that like this in this conversation with you, the more that all of us become aware of this interconnectivity with ourselves and with our world around us, that how much change could happen, right? Well, just to think, like you said, you get excited that the more we know, the more we can implement, the more we can be in awareness for this, then that can create so much positive change for individuals, for their health, but for communities and for the whole world.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. And I feel the same way about what you're sharing on social media and your website and with this podcast. I mean, it really takes all of us kind of shining our light to change the trajectory of health that we're currently on. And it absolutely desperately needs a change. So thank you so much for what you do, Dr. Donnie. I love hearing you speak and reading your work. And so I'm glad to be on this mission with you.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And thank you for joining me today. So we'll put all of this information in the notes for all of you listening. And please do subscribe and make sure you watch for the next episode of How Humans Heal. Thanks again, Dr. Cather, for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to How Humans Heal. If you liked this episode, leave a rating and a review. And for more resources, visit drdonnie.com.